My name is Ramesh. I was on the edge of that village the night the god took a human offering. The night when everything we thought we knew about superstition and horror was overturned. If you will, listen with your eyes closed while I try to tell this exactly as it happened to me. I stood close enough to see, to smell, to feel the terror. What follows is not a made-up tale. It is the real, recorded account that later walked on paper into a doctor's report, a police file, a journal article that doctors used to teach students how ritual can kill. It began in a place that looked ordinary at dusk. Mud lanes, a single street lamp that buzzed, goats tied at doorways, women sweeping the threshold with a sweeping motion that kept rhythm with the last light. From inside a small home where the family kept 2 lamps and a tray of incense, a man was carried out. Not walking, not stumbling, borne like a sack between strangers whose faces were flat with belief. I watched as they placed him on the packed earth. The first thing I saw was a wound at the back of his neck, a deep cut that bled slowly, dark and patient, as if it too were obeying a ritual. They called it Narabali, the old word for human sacrifice. In that hush, the villagers murmured that it had to be done to please a spirit, an angry god, a lineage curse, something older than the fields that drunk from the rains. I stood at the edge, the smell of mud and smoke heavy in my throat. Men and women who had laughed with me at the tea stall the week before argued in low voices about whether this would bring prosperity or doom. Belief spreads like a net. Sometimes it catches the kindest hands. I remember how they moved. Slow, precise, arranging things as if they were following instructions learned long ago. A cloth folded here, a bowl of milk placed there, threads of red and yellow tied to the posts. Amid that careful motion, the man on the ground breathed in staccato. Each breath measured a promise. Every time someone chanted an invocation, his body curled and shivered. It was as if a cold had crawled along his spine. Someone said the victim had been chosen because elders saw something in his dreams. Another whispered that a fortune teller read a sign in the liver of a goat and pointed that finger to their household. The story shifted with every tongue. He was a poor worker. He was a stranger. He was a man haunted by illness. Whatever the reasoning, that night belief had named him. Once named, the skill of the ritual took hold. Rough hands made blunt decisions. The men who bound him did so with a calm that made my stomach drop. Calm and conviction together can murder without the noise of malice. None of us who watched could stop it without stopping the world the village had already accepted. They used a sharp weapon for the strike, a blade that cut as if skilled hands guided it. Later the doctors would tell the court what the blade had done. It had not merely nicked skin. It had struck the back of the neck with such force and at such an angle that the cervical spine was transected. The spinal cord was severed cleanly enough. The body's command severed. The man's life extinguished where he lay. I thought such a detail could only belong in an autopsy room. Until I saw the slow slackening of his hands. Until I saw the way his eyes stopped finding light. The scene was lit with oil lamps and torchlight, a glow that turned people into statues with moving mouths. There were chants, low and endless. The air tasted of turmeric, of milk, of copper. When blood meets ritual, you notice the small things. The way a bowl trembles. The way a child laughs once and then stops. The way the whole crowd seems to wait for a sign that never comes. I remember how the eldest among them placed his palm on the victim's forehead, as if to bless, as if to finish a business with a touch. Then the breathing ceased. The moment stretched into a long, heavy thing. It fell on every chest present. Later, when the police came, they moved with a different rhythm. Sharp and official. They carried the body away. They took statements. In the hospital, the forensic doctors opened the case that would be written for others to read. Their report spoke plainly of a human sacrifice. It explained how the injuries were consistent with an assault by a sharp weapon on the posterior neck, a transection of the cervical spine and spinal cord. It meant the death was immediate and brutal, not an accident, not a collapse in sleep, the result of a cut intended to end life as part of a ritual. In the village afterwards, Explanations multiplied like shadows. Some said a tantric had demanded a life to fix a debt. Others said a family had been told by a spirit to hand over a body, and they obeyed out of terror or faith. The truth, as far as truth can be stitched from whispers, was that superstition and poverty braid together. They leave gaps where logic should be. In those gaps, violent things grow. I thought of the victim's family. They went home with empty hands. Simpler men among us made quick prayers. They returned to their houses with their doors bolted. Their faces were changed by what they had seen. The autopsy confirmed what our eyes already suspected. The fatal wound was not random. It was precise. The spine was severed in a way which, to a trained eye, reads like intention. The journal that later published the case used words like corroboration of circumstances and forensic findings. It showed how belief had created a crime scene. In law and medicine, we need to name the mechanism of death. Even while we grieve the human life lost. People in my village told the police that rituals sometimes asked for sacrifices. Stories passed down from elders spoke of appeasing gods with offerings. Fear of famine or misfortune can make families do terrible things. Some argued that modern law must never bow to old customs. Others whispered that when a family believes the world will end unless a ritual is done, reason becomes fragile. People act like sleepwalkers guided by an invisible hand. I confess I stood among them and felt the cold of that kind of walking. It is easy to say never until you are the one given the omen. In the weeks that followed, the place where they killed the man felt different. The earth seemed to carry the weight of the blade. People avoided the lane. Elders tightened their prayers. A small metal barrier was erected around the spot. Officials took pictures. They made measurements. They wrote reports that would be filed under case numbers. That is the way the world tries to fix the open wound ritual leaves behind. By making it a record so future generations can ask why. I tell you all of this because horror in our lives is not always the work of spirits. Spirits are often the language people use to explain misfortune. Horror can be the steel edge of a blade used in the name of devotion. It can be the slow acceptance of a custom that calls for blood. It can be the awful clarity of a post-mortem report. A report that shows in black and white what belief did in red. The paper I read later, the one that doctors wrote and summarized for students of forensic medicine, calls this a rare case of human sacrifice. It explains how rare it is in a modern age to see such Narabali. Yet it warns how superstition can still result in homicide. That is why I give you this citation. What I have told you is not a ghost story. It is documented medicine and law. It speaks of one man killed by a sharp weapon to the back of the neck. The injury resulted in cervical spine transection and death. The village called it ritual. The courts and doctors had to answer. If you imagine then 100 scenes from this single night, you will see lamplight. The chanting. The blade flash. The body sinking. The crowd silence. The empty plate of milk. You will have an image of what belief can demand when it is afraid. When you close your eyes tonight, remember this. Many horrors are human-made. Superstition still walks our lanes. Sometimes the most terrible things are not the work of monsters from stories. They are the work of people who think they serve a higher call. This is a true incident. It is recorded in a peer-reviewed forensic case report titled Narabali, a rare case of human sacrifice. It documents a real death in India. A man was killed by a sharp weapon causing transection of the cervical spine. It was part of a ritual sacrifice. The forensic details and the published paper are the reasons I can tell you this without fiction.